This video is going to go over the homework from 2.9, which has to do with the wrapper classes for integers and doubles. And so we have three exercises to do here. The first one is order up. And order up is basically the beginning of an automated order machine. And most of it is programmed for us already, but we have to program the piece that gets the number of the order from the label sent to you from the ordering machine. So if you look at what we have so far is the ordering machine is simulated with user input. It sends a full label such as 3 and then veggie burger. So basically, right now it has this menu that gets displayed, and it displays all the possible items the user can order, and then it prompts the user to enter a label. And so the user would go ahead and pick whatever they wanted. So in this case, the user selected 5 hot dog. And what we have to do is we have to add in code that will isolate the number component of this label. And we are going to do that by using the substring method to get this first character out. And then what we need to do is we then have to convert this first letter, which is going to be stored as a string, to an integer. And then finally, we're going to just print that out. Customer ordered number, and then whatever number. In this case, it would be 5. Okay, so first step is to basically get the substring, right? So if we go through the code that's already been done for us, which is up till line 18, they've already created a scanner object. Then they create the menu, which is what we kind of saw over here. And then they print out the menu, just like what we see. And then the user's prompted with enter label, and then we go ahead and store whatever the user puts in as the string customer order. So let's say that the customer entered in, just like we saw in the example, 5 hot dog. That's what would get stored here. Now our objective is to just get the substring of this order that just has the number component in it. Now it's still going to be a string, but it's just going to have the number component of the string. And the way we want to do that is to use substring, right, in order to get the first character. So we're going to get the substring of this customer order string. We want to go ahead and call substring. And if you remember, when we are talking about positions in a string, so like this is at position 0, we start at position 0. So this is 0, this next character is at 1, and the space is at 3, and so on. We only want to get the substring at position 0. Now if I just put 0 in there, remember that this version of substring takes the beginning position, and if we don't put in an end, it'll just go ahead and take the rest of the string all the way to the end. So that's just going to give us the original string. What we want to do is we want to specify an end. If I put 1 in here, remember that this version of substring takes an end that is exclusive. So this means it's going to give me the substring from position 0 up to but not including 1. So in this case, that's just the substring that is at this 0th position, which is exactly what we want. So if customer order was this string, that means that combo is just going to have 5, and I'll surround those with quotes so we know those are strings. Okay, last thing we need to do is to convert the substring that's being stored in combo. So in this case, in our example, would be the string 5. We need to convert that into an integer. So we're going to use this method here that belongs to the integer class. So if we say integer.value of and then put in the string we want to get the integer value of, that's going to give us an integer back. So we want basically this command here that they gave us, but for some string we're going to put in combo, which just has the number component of that original order string. Okay, so in this case, we will get an integer object back that has the value of 5 if we're following along with our example here. And then finally, we want to print that out. We want to print out what the customer ordered. So they already started us off with a system.out.println command, customer ordered number. Now we just need to concatenate that last part, which is combo number. And then close out the parentheses and then put our semicolon. So now if we run this, it should prompt us. So let's go ahead and put 5 hot dog. And what it should do is it should isolate just the number component of our string, store that into the string combo, and then convert that string into an integer by getting the integer value of it. And then we should see finally customer ordered number and then 5. Okay, cool. So now if we go ahead and run our tests, it should do that for any input, including, to cheeseburger, isolates the number and prints it out. And then for this one, customer order number 7, so I guess if something's not on the menu, it'll still isolate that as well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Okay, so the next one is currency, and in this exercise we were given 2 files, the currency class, which has been started for us, but we need to implement a few of the methods, and then a tester class that will test to see if what we did is works, right? So let's see what we need to add to the currency class. We do need to implement a few methods here. One of the methods is called getDollars and another is called getCents, and then we also have to implement the toString method as well. Now normally when we see methods called get something, it's simply just a getter method where we can return the value of a private instance variable, but we don't see that we have a private instance variable that represents dollars or cents. What we do see is just one single private instance variable that contains just the cost value. So this is dollars and cents, right? For example, like if the value of something is $1.99, it would literally just be 1.99, 1.99. So what we need to do is we need to isolate stuff again. We need to isolate the dollar component in order to get dollars, and we need to isolate the cents component in order to get the cents. So this is going to be a little bit more complicated than just returning the value of a private instance variable. Okay, so it actually gives us some tips here. So we can isolate the dollar part by rounding the double to an integer. So basically just taking the whole number component of the value that we have. And then they say to do that, get the double value, so the primitive double from our double type, using double value, which is a method, and then cast that result to an integer. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So we know we want to return this because we're returning an integer object. So we want to get first the primitive value, the primitive double value of this private instance variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to say value dot, and then the name of the method is right here, double value. Okay, so that by itself is just going to convert the double object type to a primitive double type. Now that we've done that, we can use integer casting. Okay, so the reason why we have to first convert it from an object type to a primitive type is that we can only cast primitive doubles to an integer. Okay, so we have to downgrade it from an object to a primitive first before we can do this casting. So what this is going to do is just like what we saw with integer casting earlier, is that it's going to take the whole number component, it's going to cut off the decimal point and everything to the right of it. So it's just going to give us the dollar component. Okay, now for get cents, there's a few different ways to get the cents here. But since we are using a double type here as our private instance variable, uh, some of the methods of getting the cents is a little bit more dangerous because of floating point errors. So what we're going to use is kind of like the safest way, which is explained right here. So the safest way is to multiply the original value, so this right here, by 100. So for instance, if I had a value of 199 and I multiplied it by 100, oops, 199, and I multiplied that by 100, then we would get that, right? We would have all of the, you would have the cents component to the left of the decimal point. We would still technically have a decimal point and then a 0, so this is still technically a double, which is why after that you would convert this to an integer. So this first step is multiply by 100, so you get that. Then you would cast that result as an int, so then you just have 199. And then the last part would be to then take the result of the number mod 100. So 199 mod 100. And so, oops, 199 mod 100. And so what that would give you is the remainder of dividing 199 by 100, which is going to be 99, which, if you remember, is just our cents component of the original value. So that's what we're going to do. And they actually kind of summarize how to do that all in one step right here. So that's what we're going to use. Okay, so to get cents, we're simply going to do that. And we can either just return cents, or we could just not store this value and just say return it. Do it all in one step. Okay, so that should cover that. And the last step is to return a string representation of our currency object. And it says that we need to return in this format here. So it looks like first we want a $sign, then the dollar component, then our decimal point, and then the cents component. So we're going to be using our get dollars and get cents method in order to do this. So we're going to say return. We're going to first return a dollar symbol. And then we're going to go ahead and concatenate the dollar component of our value. And we always want to call these methods on an object of our currency class, right? And right now we don't know the name of any object. So when you don't know the name of an object, you could just refer to the object that's calling this method as this. So this keyword is always helpful when you don't know the name of your object. So we're going to say this dot get dollars. And then the next thing we need is the decimal point. So we'll concatenate that. And then the last thing is to get the cents component. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say this dot and then get cents. Okay, so that should return a string format of our currency object in this format. Let's test it out. Okay, so we see, if we go to the currency tester, so we can see that we create a new currency object with a value of $12.45. And if we print out that value, we get our formatted string with the dollar symbol and everything. And then if we try to isolate the dollars and cents, we get the correct values there. And so we can go ahead and check against more test cases to see if our code generalizes to multiple forms of input. And it's tested all of our methods for a variety of inputs, and it passes all the tests. So now we can go ahead and go to our last exercise. So this one is called guess the numbers. All right, so in guess the numbers, we are given a class called extremes, and then just like a client code where we can test out everything. Okay, so for the extremes class, we need to implement a few methods here. We need to implement the constructor where we are setting the min and the max private instance variables. So we need to actually see what we need to set those to. It says we need to set it to the min and max of defined in the integer class. So we can use these constants here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on that. So we're going to say that min gets integer dot min value. Okay, and that goes ahead and it grabs the minimum value constant that lives in this integer class. And then for max, we can set that to integer dot max value. Okay, so that part's done. Now the next part is to fill in the min diff and max diff methods to return the difference between what the users guess. So like in this main program, we're going to have the users guess what the max and min of the integer class is. And what we want to do is we want to return the difference between that guess and the actual min or max value. Okay, so what we're going to do is for the user's guess, it's going to be passed in as this integer object called number. Okay, and it tells us we want to subtract the guess from the actual value. So we're just going to say exactly what they put here. Return the max minus the number. And that will be the difference between the actual max and the person's guess. And then similarly for mindiff, we're going to return the difference between the actual minimum and the number that the user guessed. Okay. Finally, there is a toString method that looks like is already implemented for us, and it's simply going to return a string representation in the form of min, max in between these two brackets. Okay, now we're going to go and implement our client code. So first thing is we want to create a scanner object because we're going to be asking the user to guess the maximum value of an integer and the minimum value of an integer. So let's go ahead and create our scanner object. So I'll go ahead and call it input as usual, create a new scanner object, and remember you always need to pass in system.in. Okay. So now we have our scanner object, and we also need to create an extremes object. So notice that you don't have to pass in anything because it'll automatically set min and max to the min value of an integer and a max value of an integer. So we're just going to go ahead and say extreme, and then we could just call it E, and we're going to say that it's going to get a new extremes. There we go. So that'll create a new extremes object. Now we need to prompt the user to guess the maximum value of an integer. So that's just going to be a print statement. Okay, and let's see if they want specific. Let's go ahead and copy that. So that's our prompt. And so now we need to store the users. They didn't put that as a comment. I'll add that in. Store the user's guess for max. So we're going to store that as an integer object. Okay, and I'll go ahead and store that as max guess. And so in order to get the integer, we need to say input dot next int. Okay, so that'll go ahead and grab that from user input, and then due to auto boxing, it'll convert that into an integer object here. Okay, and now we need to compute and display the difference between the max and the guess. And we know that we actually have a method for that, right? It's called maxdiff. And so we will call that on our extremes object and then pass in the number we just stored, which is the user's guess. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And we'll go ahead and call this on our extremes object, which is E. So E dot and then maxdiff, and then we need to pass in that max guess. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and store this as the max diff. Okay, so this is storing the result into this integer object. And it looks like we also want to display it. So we want to put this sentence right here. You were off by. So we can go ahead and say you were off by, and then concatenate this result here with maxdiff. Okay. Next, the next few lines of code are going to be very similar because now we're going to ask the user to guess the minimum value of the integer. So let me go ahead and copy this line, and this time we'll change it to guess the minimum integer value. And then similarly, we will get the user's input and store it into an integer reference type variable. So this time I'll go ahead and call this min guess. And so we're grabbing the user's input and storing it into that integer object. And oops, I guess I had added that. Okay, there we go. And then we want to compute and display the difference. So very much like what we have here. So instead of calling this maxdiff, we're going to call this mindiff. And of course, now we're calling the method called mindiff instead of maxdiff. So if I go back here, here's our mindiff method, and it also takes in an integer. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're also passing in the guess for the minimum, so that's going to be min guess. Okay, so then it's going to return that difference, and now we want to print out our you were off by message. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and concatenate the difference between the actual minimum and the person's guess, which is stored in mindiff. Okay, so now we can go ahead and run this code. Okay, so we're going to enter in a guess, and I'm just going to put in a random negative number, and then it tells us how much we were off by, and then we're going to put in our guess for, oh, that was for a maximum. Now we're going to put in our guess for the minimum, and then it tells us how much we were off by there. So now we can go ahead and check the code against multiple inputs. Okay, so we can see our different test values here, and they all get the expected output.